The cobblestones were cold, but Wren had slept on worse. She pressed herself into the corner where two buildings met, pulling her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders. The autumn wind cut through the fabric like it wasn't there, but at least the stone walls blocked some of the gusts. Small mercies. She'd learned to survive on small mercies. The castle loomed above her, its towers scraping the star-scattered sky. She hadn't meant to wander so close to the Lycan king's domain. But the city guards had chased her from her usual spot near the market, and she'd run until her lungs burned, until she couldn't run anymore, until she'd collapsed in this shadowed corner and prayed no one would find her. Homeless, orphaned, invisible. She was 20 years old, and she had been alone for 3 of them, ever since the fever had taken her mother, ever since the landlord had thrown her into the streets, ever since the world had made it clear that a poor human girl with no family and no skills was worth less than the dirt beneath noble boots. The wind howled. Wren curled tighter, tucking her knees to her chest, trying to conserve what little warmth her body still held. She wouldn't cry. Crying wasted energy, wasted water, wasted time. She would close her eyes. She would sleep. And in the morning she would find food somehow. She always found food somehow. She didn't hear the footsteps until they stopped directly in front of her. Her eyes flew open. A figure stood silhouetted against the moonlight, tall, impossibly tall, wrapped in a cloak that probably cost more than everything Wren had ever owned combined. She scrambled backward, pressing herself harder against the stone, making herself as small as possible. Please. The word scraped out of her throat. I'm not causing trouble. I'll leave. I just needed to rest for a moment. I'll go. Please don't. Don't what? The voice was deep, calm. It didn't sound angry, which confused her. Guards were always angry. Nobles were always disgusted. Everyone who found her sleeping where she shouldn't was always something terrible. Don't hurt me, she whispered, hating how pathetic she sounded. I don't have anything worth taking. I'm no one. I'm nothing. The figure crouched down, and moonlight caught his face. Wren's breath stopped. She knew that face. Everyone in the kingdom knew that face. The sharp jaw, the dark hair, the eyes that burned like molten gold even in the darkness. The Lycan king. The most powerful being in the realm. The monster that mothers used to frighten children into obedience. He was crouching in a dirty alley, looking at her like she was something other than garbage. You're freezing, he said. It wasn't a question. Wren couldn't respond. Her voice had fled. Her thoughts had scattered. Every survival instinct she possessed was screaming at her to run, but her legs wouldn't move. The king studied her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he unclasped his cloak and swept it off his shoulders. What are you? He draped it around her. The fabric was heavy, warm. It smelled like pine and wood smoke and something else. Something wild that made her heart race for reasons she didn't understand. The cold that had seeped into her bones began to retreat, chased away by a heat that seemed impossible for mere cloth. I don't... She clutched the edges of the cloak, too stunned to process what was happening. Your Majesty, I can't. This is yours. And now it's keeping you from freezing to death. He said it simply, like giving his cloak to a street beggar was the most natural thing in the world. When did you last eat? The question caught her off guard. This morning, I found some bread behind the baker's. Something flickered across his face. Pain, she thought, though that made no sense. Why would a king feel pain over a stranger's hunger? Come with me. Wren's heart lurched. What? To the castle. He rose to his full height, extending a hand toward her. You need food, warmth, and a bed that isn't made of stone. I can provide all three. She stared at his hand like it might bite her. Why? Because you need help. People don't help me. The words came out harder than she intended, sharp with 3 years of learned cynicism. People step over me. People pretend I don't exist. People tell me to move along before I make their streets look untidy. No one helps me, Your Majesty, especially not kings. He didn't withdraw his hand, didn't look offended by her bitterness. If anything, his golden eyes softened. Then let me be the first. Wren wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, that kindness always came with a price, that following a powerful stranger to his castle was exactly the kind of stupid decision that got poor girls killed. But she was so cold, so hungry, so tired of fighting just to survive another day. And something in his eyes, something ancient and patient and impossibly gentle, made her want to believe. Her hand trembled as she reached for his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, and he pulled her to her feet like she weighed nothing. She stumbled, legs weak from cold and hunger, and his other hand caught her elbow, steadying her. Can you walk? I think so. If you can't, tell me. I'll carry you. The casual offer made her head spin. Carry her. The Lycan king would carry her. A homeless human girl who'd been sleeping in an alley. She must be dreaming. She must have frozen to death in that corner, and this was some fever vision her dying mind had conjured to ease the passing. But his hand was warm in hers. The cloak was warm on her shoulders. And when she took a step, the cobblestones were solid beneath her worn boots. Real. This was real. He led her through the castle gates, past guards who bowed to their king without questioning the ragged girl at his side, through a courtyard lit by torches, upstairs that seemed to go on forever, down corridors hung with tapestries that cost more than her mother had made in a lifetime. Wren kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to turn cruel, to reveal the trap, to prove that the world worked exactly the way she'd always known it did. It didn't happen. Instead, he brought her to a room that stole her breath. A fire roared in the hearth, filling the space with warmth and golden light. A table sat laden with food, meat and bread and cheese and fruit, more than she could eat in a week. A bed dominated one wall, piled with blankets and pillows that looked softer than clouds. Eat, the king said from the doorway. Rest. The room is yours for as long as you need it. Wren turned to face him, clutching his cloak around her shoulders. I don't understand. Why are you doing this? He was quiet for a moment. His golden eyes moved over her face, searching for something she couldn't name. Because no one should have to sleep on stone, he said finally. Because hunger is a cruelty I can ease. Because I found you freezing in the shadow of my castle. And what kind of king would I be if I walked past? Most kings would. I'm not most kings. He turned to leave. Wait. The word escaped before she could stop it. He paused, looking back. Your cloak. You'll want it back. Something shifted in his expression. Something warm and wondering. Keep it, he said. It looks better on you anyway. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, and Wren stood alone in a room fit for royalty, with a king's cloak on her shoulders, and absolutely no idea what had just happened. She ate until she couldn't eat anymore. She bathed in hot water that turned grey with 3 years of street grime. She climbed into the softest bed she'd ever touched, and pulled blankets around her that smelled like lavender. And as sleep pulled her under, warm and safe for the first time since her mother died, she thought of golden eyes and a voice that asked for nothing in return. It had to be a trick. It had to be. Didn't it? Wren woke to sunlight and the smell of fresh bread. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. The bed was too soft, the air too warm, the silence too complete. Then memory crashed back. The alley, the cold, the king with golden eyes wrapping his cloak around her shoulders. She sat up sharply, heart pounding. The room was real. The fire had burned down to embers, but warmth still lingered. And on the table by the window, someone had laid out a breakfast that made her stomach clench with desperate hunger. She was out of bed before she could think, tearing into the bread with hands that shook. Fresh, still warm. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten bread that wasn't stale or half mouldy. Tears pricked her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. A knock at the door made her freeze, a chunk of bread still in her mouth. "May I come in?" The king's voice, deep, calm, polite, asking permission to enter his own castle room. Wren swallowed hastily, brushing crumbs from her borrowed nightgown. When had someone changed her clothes? And managed a strangled yes? The door opened. The Lycan king stepped inside, and the room seemed to shrink around him. He was even more imposing in daylight, tall and broad, dressed simply in dark clothes that did nothing to diminish his presence. His golden eyes found her immediately, and something in them softened. "You're awake. Good." He stayed near the door, keeping distance between them. "How do you feel?" "Confused." The honest answer slipped out before she could stop it. "That's fair." He gestured to the chairs by the cold fireplace. "May I sit? I'd like to talk." Wren nodded, lowering herself into the opposite chair, hyper-aware of how ridiculous she must look. A street rat in silk, crumbs on her chin, sitting across from the most powerful man in the realm. The king settled into his chair with an ease that seemed practiced, patient, like he had all the time in the world. "You're wondering why you're here," he said. The thought crossed my mind. "And you're waiting for the trap to spring." She flinched. He'd read her too easily. "I've lived on the streets for 3 years, Your Majesty." She lifted her chin, refusing to be ashamed. "I've learned that nothing is free. Everyone wants something." "What do you think I want?" The question hung between them. Wren had considered this through her broken sleep, had turned it over and over in her mind. A king finding a homeless girl, bringing her to his castle, giving her food and clothes and a bed. There were only so many explanations. "I think you're either very kind or very cruel," she said carefully, "and I haven't figured out which yet." Something flickered across his face. Approval, maybe, or respect. "I'll tell you what I want," he said. "I want you to stay here until you're healthy, until you've eaten enough meals that I can't count your ribs through your dress, until the shadows under your eyes fade and the tremor leaves your hands. And then? And then you can decide what comes next. I'll offer you a position in the castle if you want one, work that doesn't involve sleeping on stone or starving, or I'll give you money and supplies and let you build a life somewhere else. Your choice." Wren stared at him. "That's it? You want nothing in return?" "Nothing you don't freely give." The words sounded impossible. Men didn't talk like this. Kings certainly didn't. And yet he sat across from her, golden eyes steady, offering her the one thing no one had offered in 3 years. Options. I don't understand you, she admitted quietly. You will, in time. He leaned forward slightly, forearms resting on his knees. Tell me about yourself, Wren. That is your name, isn't it? One of the servants heard you say it in your sleep. Heat flooded her cheeks. I talk in my sleep? Apparently. The corner of his mouth twitched. You also called someone a festering son of a dung heap. I assume that wasn't directed at me. A startled laugh escaped her before she could stop it. When had she last laughed? She couldn't remember. That was probably about the baker on 3rd Street, she said. He sets his dogs on anyone who takes scraps from his bins. Charming. The king's tone suggested the baker might receive a visit from the city guard. What else? Where did you come from? How did you end up sleeping outside my walls? She should lie, should protect herself, keep her story hidden, give him nothing he could use against her. But something about his patience, his quiet attention, loosened the knots she'd tied around her past. My mother was a seamstress, she heard herself say. Just the two of us. We had a small room above a tailor's shop. It wasn't much, but it was home. What happened? Fever. The word came out flat. She'd learned to say it without feeling, or at least without showing feeling. 3 years ago, she got sick. I couldn't afford a healer. She died in our room, and the landlord threw me out before she was even cold. Said he couldn't have plague victims on his property. The king said nothing, but something shifted in his expression. A hardening around the jaw, a darkening in those golden eyes. I tried to find work, Wren continued. But no one wants to hire a girl with no references, no family, no connections. So I learned to survive. Where to sleep without being caught. Which garbage had the best scraps. How to be invisible. Invisible, he repeated softly. It's safer. When people see you, they hurt you. When they don't, they step over you. I prefer being stepped over. The silence that followed was heavy. Wren looked down at her hands, scarred and calloused from 3 years of fighting to exist. She shouldn't have told him any of that. Shouldn't have given him pieces of herself that could be used as weapons. Wren. She looked up. The king had risen from his chair and was crossing the room toward her. She tensed, but he only knelt beside her seat, bringing himself to her level. This close, she could see the individual threads of gold in his irises, could feel the heat that seemed to radiate from his skin. You don't have to be invisible here, he said. You don't have to hide or fight or survive on scraps. I know you don't trust me yet. I haven't given you reason to. But I'm asking you to let me try. Why? The question came out as a whisper. You don't know me. I'm nobody. Why would you care what happens to a homeless girl who was sleeping outside your castle? He was quiet for a long moment. His golden eyes searched her face, and whatever he found there made something in his expression soften into something almost painful. Because I see you, he said simply, and I don't think anyone has seen you in a very long time. The words hit her like a physical blow. Tears burned behind her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She would not cry. She would not break down in front of this strange, impossible king who spoke like he actually meant the things he said. I should go, she managed, though she made no move to stand. I've imposed enough. You've imposed nothing. He rose, offering her his hand. But if you need space, I understand. The castle and grounds are open to you. Explore. Rest. Eat. I'll find you this evening if you'd like company. She looked at his hand. Large, strong, capable of violence, and yet extended so gently. Why this evening? Because I'd like to know you better. He smiled, small but genuine. And because I find myself wanting to see you smile again. The sound you made when you laughed. I think I'd like to hear more of it. He left before she could respond, closing the door softly behind him. Wren sat alone in the sunlight, his words echoing in her ears. I see you. No one had seen her in 3 years. She'd made sure of it. But somehow, impossibly, the Lycan king had. And she didn't know whether to be terrified or grateful. 5 days passed, and Wren began to believe this might not be a dream. She explored the castle like a ghost, drifting through corridors and gardens and libraries filled with more books than she'd known existed. Servants smiled at her. Guards nodded respectfully. No one chased her away, demanded she explain herself, or looked at her like she was dirt they'd scraped off their boots. And every evening, the king came. They talked for hours. He told her about his kingdom, his duties, the loneliness of ruling for centuries. She told him about her mother's laugh, the way sunlight used to fall through their tiny window, the dreams she'd had before the world crushed them. He never pitied her, never treated her like something broken. He simply listened and asked questions, and looked at her with those golden eyes like every word she spoke mattered. She learned his name on the third night, Theron. It felt strange on her tongue, too intimate for a king, but he'd insisted. Your Majesty makes me feel ancient, he'd said with a wry smile. I'm only 400. That's practically young for a Lycan. She'd laughed, and his eyes had lit up like she'd given him a gift. Now, on the fifth night, they sat together in the library, a fire crackling between them, and cups of wine warming their hands. Wren had never tasted wine before coming here. She'd decided she liked it. Can I ask you something? She said, the warmth of the fire and the wine loosening her tongue. Always. Why haven't you asked about the mate bond? Theron went still. Wren watched his face carefully, searching for the flicker of something hidden. You know about that, he said slowly. I've heard stories, Lycans and their fated mates. The one person meant for them across all of time. She turned her wine cup in her hands, watching the firelight dance in the liquid. You've been kind to me. Impossibly kind. And I keep waiting for the catch. Keep waiting to find out what you really want. But if you're hoping I'm somehow your mate... You are! The words landed like stones in still water. Wren's hands tightened on her cup. What? You're my mate. He said it simply, like it was obvious. Like it wasn't the most absurd thing she'd ever heard. I knew the moment I caught your scent in that alley. Everything in me recognized you. That's impossible. And yet, I'm human. Yes. I'm nobody. I'm a homeless girl who was sleeping in your garbage. You were never nobody. His voice hardened, not with anger, but with conviction. And you weren't sleeping in garbage. You were surviving. There's a difference. Wren set down her wine before she dropped it. Her hands were shaking again, and she hated it. Hated how easily he unraveled her, how 5 days of kindness had stripped away 3 years of armor. You should have told me. Would you have believed me? She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. No, she wouldn't have. She would have assumed it was a trick, a manipulation, a lie designed to get her into his bed. I'm telling you now, Theron continued, because I think you're ready to hear it. But nothing has to change. The bond exists whether we acknowledge it or not. What matters is what you want. What I want. A sharp laugh escaped her. No one has ever cared what I want. I care. 2 words. Simple. Devastating. Wren stood abruptly, moving toward the window, needing distance. Outside, the moon hung fat and silver over the gardens. Beautiful. She'd never had time to notice beauty before, too busy surviving. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted to the glass. "I don't know how to be someone's mate. I don't know how to trust that this is real. Every time something good happened in my life, it got taken away. My mother, our home, every scrap of safety I ever had." Her voice cracked, and she pressed on anyway. "I'm terrified that if I let myself believe in this, I'll wake up tomorrow back in that alley, and it will all have been a dream." She heard him rise, heard his footsteps cross the room, slow and deliberate, giving her time to stop him. She didn't. He stopped just behind her, close enough that she could feel his warmth against her back. "Wren." His voice was rough. "Turn around." She turned. He was closer than she'd realized, his golden eyes burning in the moonlight, his expression stripped of the careful control he usually wore. What remained was raw, vulnerable, ancient and young all at once. "I have waited 400 years for you," he said. 400 years of watching others find their mates, wondering if I ever would. And then I walked through my own city and found you shivering in an alley, and everything I'd ever been searching for was right there, hungry, freezing, alone. His hand rose to her face, fingers tracing her cheek like she was something precious. "You think you're nobody. You think 3 years of suffering erased whatever worth you once had. But I look at you, and I see someone who survived the unsurvivable. Someone who kept fighting when the world gave her every reason to stop. Someone brave and sharp, and so incredibly strong that she doesn't even realize it." Tears spilled down her cheeks. She couldn't stop them, didn't try. "You see too much," she whispered. "I see exactly enough." His thumb brushed away a tear. "I see you, Wren, the real you. And I am telling you, not as a king, not as your mate, but as a man who has lived long enough to know the truth when he finds it. You are worth everything. Everything. You deserved better than what the world gave you, and I want to spend the rest of my very long life making up for it." She couldn't breathe. The weight of his words pressed against her chest, cracking open places she'd sealed shut years ago. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I know." He stepped closer, his forehead coming to rest against hers. "I'm scared too." "You? What could you possibly be scared of?" "Losing you." The admission came out ragged. "I just found you, and you're human and mortal, and the mate bond can change that if you accept it. But if you don't, if you can't, then I'll have decades with you at most. And I'm terrified that even that won't be enough." They stood there, foreheads touching, breath mingling, the moonlight pooling around them like liquid silver. "I don't know how to accept something I don't understand," Wren whispered. "Then let me show you." His hand slid to the back of her neck, cradling her head. "Let me show you what it means to be cherished, to be protected, to be wanted not for what you can provide, but simply for who you are. And if I can't give you what you need, you already have." His lips brushed her forehead, feather light. "You're here. You're alive. You're letting me stand this close without running. That's more than enough. That's everything." Wren closed her eyes, letting his warmth wash over her. The logical part of her mind screamed warnings. Too fast, too much, too good to be true. But the rest of her, the part that had been cold and hungry and alone for so long, wanted to believe, wanted him. Stay with me, Theron murmured against her hair. Not forever. Not yet. Just tonight. Let me hold you while you sleep. Let me prove that I'll still be here when you wake up. She should say no, should retreat to her own room, her own bed, the safety of distance. Yes, she breathed instead. He led her to the sofa by the fire, pulled her down beside him, wrapped his arms around her like she was something worth protecting. She curled into his chest, her ear pressed to his heartbeat, his cloak from that first night draped over them both. She fell asleep, warm and safe, and wanted. And for the first time in 3 years, she let herself hope. The nobles arrived on the 10th day. Wren had known, distantly, that Theron had responsibilities beyond their quiet evenings together. He was a king. Kings had courts, councils, obligations that demanded attention. But she hadn't expected the reality of it to crash into her so violently. They came in carriages draped with house banners, lords and ladies from across the territory summoned for some annual gathering she didn't understand. The castle flooded with perfumed bodies and sharp eyes and whispered conversations that stopped whenever she walked past. She tried to stay invisible. Old habits. But invisibility was harder when you were wearing silk instead of rags, when servants bowed to you, when the king himself had been seen carrying you through his halls. The whispers found her anyway. "Did you hear? He found her sleeping in the street like a common beggar. A human, a homeless human, and he thinks she's his mate?" Perhaps his mind is finally going. 4 centuries is a long time. Even kings go mad eventually. She's probably a fortune hunter. Saw an opportunity and took it. Clever, really, if you think about it. Wren stood frozen in the corridor, hidden behind a pillar, listening to the cluster of noblewomen dissect her like carrion. Her chest ached. Her hands trembled. Every word confirmed what she'd always known. She didn't belong here. She was a street rat playing dress-up, and everyone could see it. "The council will never accept her," one of the women continued. "A queen needs breeding, connections, power. What does this girl have? Nothing. She is nothing." Wren fled. She didn't think about where she was going. Her feet carried her through corridors she'd memorized over the past week, down staircases, through a servant's entrance, until she burst into the cold evening air of the courtyard. The gates were right there, open, unguarded. She could leave. She could walk out those gates and disappear back into the city, back into the shadows where she belonged. Theron would be better off without her. His council would approve. His nobles would stop whispering. He could find a proper mate, someone worthy of standing beside a king. Her feet carried her forward. "Going somewhere?" The voice stopped her cold. Theron stood at the edge of the courtyard, still dressed in the formal attire he'd worn to greet his guests. His golden eyes moved over her, the tear tracks on her cheeks, the trembling of her hands, the way she stood frozen halfway to freedom. "You heard," he said. Not a question. "I heard enough." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "They're right, Theron. I don't belong here. I'm nobody. I have nothing to offer you, nothing to offer this kingdom. If you take me as your mate, your council will fight you. Your nobles will despise you. You'll spend your reign defending a choice that never should have been made." "Is that what you think?" "It's what I know." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "You found me sleeping in garbage. That's who I am. That's all I'll ever be in their eyes. And eventually, it'll be all you see, too." Theron crossed the courtyard in long strides, stopping an arm's length away, close enough that she could see the muscle jumping in his jaw, the barely contained fury in his golden eyes. Not directed at her, she realized. Directed at whoever had made her feel this way. "Do you want to leave?" he asked. The question surprised her. "What?" "It's a simple question, Ren. Do you want to leave? If the answer is yes, if you truly want to walk out those gates and never come back, I won't stop you. I told you from the beginning that you would always have a choice. I meant it." She stared at him. The gates were right there. Freedom, anonymity, the familiar comfort of invisibility. "I don't know what I want," she whispered. "Then let me tell you what I want." He stepped closer, and she didn't back away. "I want you. Not a noble woman with breeding and connections. Not a political alliance wrapped in silk. You. The woman who survived 3 years on the streets and still had the courage to laugh. The woman who challenges me, questions me, refuses to bow and scrape like everyone else in this castle." "Theron, I'm not finished." His hands came up to cup her face, gentle despite the intensity burning in his eyes. "Those nobles in there, they've spent their whole lives measuring worth by bloodlines and bank accounts. They wouldn't recognize true strength if it saved their lives. But I've lived for 400 years, Ren. I've seen empires rise and fall. I've watched the powerful crumble and the powerless endure. And I'm telling you, with absolute certainty, that you are worth more than every person in that ballroom combined." Tears spilled down her cheeks. She couldn't stop them. "They'll never accept me." "Then they'll learn, or they'll leave." His thumbs brushed away her tears. "I am the king. My word is law. And if I say that the woman I love is worthy of standing beside me, then that is the end of the discussion." Her heart stopped. "The woman you love?" "Yes." He said it like it was obvious, like it was simple. "I love you, Ren. I have loved you since you looked up at me in that alley with terror in your eyes and still had the fire to tell me that people don't help you. I will love you until the stars burn out. And I don't care if the whole world thinks I'm mad for it." She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. This man, this king, was standing in front of her, declaring his love, choosing her over his council and his nobles, and everything that should have mattered more than a homeless girl. "I'm scared," she choked out. "I know. I don't know how to be what you need." "You already are." "I could ruin everything, or you could make everything worth having." He leaned closer, his forehead pressing against hers. "Choose, Ren. Not what's safe, not what's logical. What do you want?" She thought of the gates behind her, the cold streets, the loneliness that had been her only companion for 3 years. Then she thought of golden eyes and a cloak wrapped around her shoulders and a voice that said, "I see you," like it meant something. "I want to stay," she whispered. "I want you. I choose you, Theron. I choose this, even though it terrifies me. I choose—" He kissed her. His mouth claimed hers with a desperation that stole her breath, his hands sliding into her hair, pulling her closer like he was afraid she might still disappear. She grabbed the front of his formal coat and held on, kissing him back with everything she had. Every fear, every hope, every broken piece of herself that was somehow starting to heal. When they finally broke apart, both gasping, his golden eyes blazed with something fierce and possessive and utterly devoted. "Mine," he growled against her lips. "You're mine, Ren, and I am yours. Whatever comes next, we face it together." She laughed, the sound wet with tears, but real. "Together." He kissed her again, softer this time, a promise instead of a claim. Behind them, the gates stood open. Wren didn't look back. The bonding ceremony took place the following evening, before the assembled nobles could scatter back to their territories. Theron had given her the choice to wait, weeks, months, however long she needed, but Wren had surprised herself with her answer. Now, she'd said, still wrapped in his arms in that moonlit courtyard. Before I have time to doubt, before they have time to scheme. Now. So now she stood in the great hall, dressed in a gown of deep emerald that the seamstresses had worked through the night to complete. Her hair had been braided with tiny silver threads. Her hands didn't shake. The nobles filled the hall, their faces a sea of shock and barely concealed outrage. She recognized the women who'd called her nothing, their painted lips pressed thin with fury. She recognized the lords who'd whispered about the king's madness, their eyes darting between her and Theron like they couldn't quite believe what they were witnessing. Good, let them watch. Theron stood at the altar, resplendent in black and gold, his amber eyes fixed on her like she was the only person in the room. When she reached him, he took her hands in his, and the warmth of his grip steadied something deep in her chest. Before these witnesses, the officiant intoned, before the moon and the ancient laws, do you, Theron, king of the Lycans, claim this woman as your mate? I claim her. His voice rang through the hall, brooking no argument. She is my heart, my home, my equal in all things. I claim her today, tomorrow, and for every day that follows. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Theron's gaze never wavered from Wren's face. And do you, Wren, accept this claim? Do you bind yourself to this male freely, without reservation, from this day until your souls return to the stars? Wren thought of the alley where he'd found her, the cold stone, the hunger, the bone-deep certainty that she would die alone and unmourned. She thought of his cloak settling over her shoulders, the first warmth she'd felt in months. I accept, she said, her voice clear and strong. I bind myself to him freely. He saw me when no one else would. He chose me when I couldn't choose myself. And I choose him now, before everyone who said I wasn't worthy. I choose him forever. Something blazed in Theron's golden eyes, pride, love, fierce satisfaction. Then by the ancient laws you are bonded. What the fates have joined, let no force tear asunder. Theron pulled her close and kissed her, deep and thorough, in front of every noble who had ever doubted her worth. The hall erupted into applause, some genuine, some forced, all of it irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was his arms around her, his mouth on hers, the bond settling into place like a key turning in a lock. When they broke apart, Wren turned to face the crowd. The women who had called her nothing stood near the front, their faces pale with shock. One of them, a lady in blue silk who had been particularly vicious, met Wren's eyes and quickly looked away. Wren smiled. Not cruel, not gloating, simply the smile of a woman who had survived worse than whispered gossip and had come out stronger. The celebration lasted until dawn. Wren danced in Theron's arms, accepted congratulations from nobles who now tripped over themselves to curry favor, and drank wine that tasted like victory. Through it all, Theron stayed close, a hand on her waist, her back, her shoulder, always touching, always present. When they finally retired to his chambers, their chambers now, he undressed her slowly, reverently, like she was something sacred. He laid her down on silk sheets and showed her exactly what it meant to be cherished, worshipped, loved beyond measure. Afterward, tangled together in the darkness, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, she said the words that had been building in her chest for days. I love you. He went perfectly still. Then his arms tightened around her, crushing her against him. Again. I love you, Theron. Again. His voice was rough, broken. She laughed, the sound bright and free. I love you. I love you. I... He silenced her with a kiss, fierce and desperate. I love you, he breathed against her lips. I have loved you since the moment I saw you shivering in that alley. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. You are everything, Wren. Everything I never knew I needed. She fell asleep in his arms, warm and whole and home. 2 years later, Wren stood in the castle gardens, watching her daughter take her first steps across the grass. Luna had her father's golden eyes and her mother's stubborn spirit. She toddled forward on unsteady legs, arms outstretched, giggling with delight at her own accomplishment. She's perfect, Theron said from beside her, wonder thick in his voice. She's trouble. Wren grinned as Luna promptly sat down hard and began pulling up fistfuls of grass. She gets that from you. From me? I'm the most well-behaved king in 3 centuries. You carried a homeless girl into your castle because she looked cold. A brilliant decision that brought me my mate and my daughter. He slid his arms around her from behind, pulling her back against his chest. I regret nothing. Wren leaned into him, watching their daughter explore the world with fearless curiosity. So much had changed. She had changed. The homeless girl who had slept on cold stone was gone. In her place stood a queen, confident, beloved, fierce in the protection of her people. She had established shelters across the city, places where the hungry could eat and the homeless could sleep without fear. No one would suffer as she had suffered. She had made sure of it. The nobles who had whispered about her worthlessness now bowed when she passed. The lady in blue silk had publicly apologized 3 months after the bonding, her family's fortunes mysteriously declining until she did. Wren hadn't asked Theron about that. She hadn't needed to. What are you thinking about? Theron murmured against her hair. The night you found me. She turned in his arms, facing him. I was so certain I was going to die. I'd made peace with it, almost. And then you appeared out of nowhere and wrapped your cloak around my shoulders like it was the most natural thing in the world. It was. His golden eyes were soft. You were cold. I had a cloak. The math was simple. The math changed my life. He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that still made her heart flutter. It changed mine too. I was 400 years old, Wren. I'd given up on finding my mate. And then there you were, half frozen and furious, telling me that kings don't help people like you. He pressed his forehead to hers. I knew in that moment that I would spend the rest of my life proving you wrong. You have. She rose on her toes, pressing a soft kiss to his lips. Every single day. Luna shrieked with laughter in the grass, drawing their attention. She'd discovered a butterfly and was watching it with wide-eyed wonder. Wren watched her daughter, her heart so full it ached. She had been a poor girl sleeping outside castle walls, invisible and alone, certain that kindness was a trap and hope was a lie. Now she was a queen, a mother, a woman who had found her worth in the arms of a king who had seen her when no one else would. All because one cold night, a stranger had wrapped her in his cloak and asked for nothing in return. If you enjoyed this story, Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new tale of fated mates, powerful kings, and love that conquers all. Leave a comment telling us your favorite moment, and we'll see you in the next story.